Good evening, everyone, and an extremely warm welcome to all of you. Core HRIR is back with its ninth webinar in the Learning Weekend series, and we continue with our legacy of learning and knowledge sharing. I'm Jyoti, your host for the day, and our thought leader for today is Mr. George Kemish, who will be sharing his insights on the topic The Future of HR Supporting the Value Chain. Before we start with our webinar, we would like to share a little bit about our core HRIR group for the ease of those who are joining us for the very first time. Core HRIR group was formed in January 2017 and it comprises of HR professionals from across the world. We essentially have 500 plus HR leaders and CHROs from Fortune 500 companies who are a part of this group. Our logo in itself represents our commitment and vision to the development of HR professionals through education, knowledge sharing, collaboration, networking, and of course, to provide a platform to connect and share expertise with one and all. Interestingly, the black, blue, and yellow colors in the logo represent wisdom, power, trust, optimism, and self mastery, which is what is the aim of this group. Since our very inception, we have come up with initiatives that play a catalyst role in grooming leaders for tomorrow through immensely enriched learnings from our experts of today. We provide with interactive platforms on WhatsApp group wherein we have numerous discussions and knowledge sharing on various topics on a day-to-day basis. That's one of our first initiative. The second initiative that we currently have been working on is the webinar series. And we're extremely proud to say that this is our ninth webinar in the Learning Weekend series. Then we have our Chai Buddy series, wherein all HR professionals meet face to face, discuss new ideas, initiatives, industry practices, and gain insights from our leaders and experts. One of the other initiatives that we've been working on is to provide career opportunities, job board, which is essentially for providing all HR professionals an opportunity and a platform to explore job opportunities within the HR functions across India and overseas. We also have our Chai Buddy series. The last Chai Buddy series was held in October, and we are looking forward to plan our next Chai Buddy series in the month of December. Our next Feather in the Cap initiative is the Shining HR Award, which is basically to felicitate outstanding and deserving HR professionals across the industry. We are all in all trying to be a one stop solution, which basically aims to augment the knowledge, opportunities, skills, thoughts, and information that is relevant for human resource development. Moving on to our session, I feel extremely privileged today to introduce our thought leader, Mr. George Kemish, who is a principal consultant, specialist human resources that deals in providing services across public and private sectors in HR strategy, organizational design, change management, and business scenario planning. He has over 20 years of experience and is a subject matter expert in strategic HR, workforce planning, and all aspects of business management. He started his career as an engineering apprentice with Chrysler UK and further moved on to Royal Air Force in senior management positions. He further started with local government as business manager and was responsible to the board of governors. And post that, he joined Branson Community College. Uh, he also worked with UK Ministry of Defence as HR business partner and then moved on as manpower planning, resourcing and deployment consultant. Having graduated from Law School of Northern Rumbia University with a master's in employment law and practice, he is a multi-talented turnaround professional and a scholar. He is currently in his eighth year of mentoring students at an international business school, University of Lincoln. So there's loads to his accolades. A little bit about myself. I am Jyoti Sharma, HR professional with over 12 plus years of experience. And I've worked in various HR functions and different verticals. I'm currently working with British Council and I've previously worked with organizations like IBM and Aon Hewitt. Coming to our topic for today, which is the future of HR supporting the value chain. As we all know, we're in a highly competitive world of human resources. The global economy today is facing challenges such as shifts in roles, increasing degree of automations and analytics, change in employee preferences regarding employers and working models, and also we face challenges in structuring organizational processes, rewarding and retaining talent, and of course having strong HR strategies. So while we are facing with all of these challenges today, let's hear it out from our expert, Mr. George Kemish, who will share his insights on the topic. So over to you, Mr. George.
Hello, Jyoti. Hello, everybody. I feel really privileged to be talking to you today, and I hope that you will be able to take some of the elements away that I'll be talking about so as you can use them in your working life. I'm going to ask Jyoti to put the first slide up for me. One of the main things we need to understand is what is meant by value. In our private life, value is often based on what we do or even what we receive. But as you'll see in this next slide, in a business context, value needs to be evaluated in terms of what we create and whether or not we meet or even exceed the expectations of the external customer. If you've been following Professor Dave Ulrich, you would have no doubt seen his short video on the future of HR. It's called Outside In, where he explains the importance of basing HR strategy on the value provided to the external stakeholders. If you have not seen this video, you can do so by viewing my article entitled The Future of HR on LinkedIn. The link to the video is in the comments. It's only about 5 minutes long, the video, but well worth watching because it does explain the HR value chain going back through the organization. Whereas what I'll be talking about today is how you connect HR into the value chain for the whole organization. Whilst I would agree with Dave Ulrich that investors, society, and even government agencies are important as they can have an effect on business and vice versa, it is the customer that is likely to have the biggest effect on both the return on investment and the bottom line. If I could ask Jyoti just to put the next slide up for me, you'll see that it is for this reason that the value chain needs to start with the customer and work back through every department in the organization. Although this needs to start with a holistic approach at a strategic level, in many instances, we still see the business plan being handed to the HR professional to interpret after the corporate planning process has been completed. I believe this to be a huge mistake. On the next slide, you'll see that in business planning, there is a need to look at trends in both the internal and external environments. These will include social, technological, economic, political, environmental, and demographic trends. And planners need to understand the context in which each of these trends may have an effect on the organization. By excluding the HR professional from the overall business planning process, you deprive him or her of gaining a first-hand insight into the interdepartmental discussions that will have taken account of these trends when forging the outcome of the planning process. In addition, it often prevents other heads of department in having an input into the content of the HR strategy itself. And in this next slide, you'll see that, in my opinion, the HR professional should be included as part of the overall business planning team so that she or he can collaborate with all heads of department in formulating the HR strategy, thereby reducing the risk of misinterpretation of their needs, whilst ensuring that the HR strategy facilitates the processes that support the value chain, taking into account external and internal trends and changes in the business environment. I would also suggest a move away from having a separate HR strategy document. By incorporating the HR strategy into the overall business plan against each individual goal, the HR strategy can be reviewed and changed at the same time as the organizational goals are reviewed and changed, thereby allowing change to be undertaken more expediently. It is also an excellent way of ensuring that the HR strategy is linked directly into the value chain. So the goals that the organization have actually set should be looking at what value the customer will actually receive. That's what we mean by this. And then by linking the HR strategy into the individual organizational goals, then you're linking it into the actual value chain itself. John Harvey Jones, you've probably not heard of him, but he was a CEO of a major chemical company. And he once remarked that if industry is not changing, then it is dying. That, of course, means that there is constant change in the workplace. And on the next slide, you also see that I've said the biggest change on the horizon is digitization. And in my opinion, we will see information technology systems linking all departments, thereby providing management with an opportunity to draw data from across the organization. This will provide the HR professional with an opportunity to collect, analyze, and review data, and by so doing, she or he will be able to pinpoint areas where problems may have started to occur and to investigate whether this is linked to human resources. I think here we have to remember that it's people that actually add value. Systems, processes, and machinery are there to support people in doing so. So people are very important. I know one of the questions that came out earlier when I looked through the list of questions that have been sent was, do we think that HR will become defunct? The answer to that is no. I think it will change. And I think a lot of it will come down to the analysis of data. So with this, providing the HR professional with an opportunity to collect, analyze, and review data, the HR professional will be able to add value through the incorporation of a HR strategy focused on business outcomes, because you will have this holistic view of what's happening throughout the organization. And of course, the HR professional will need to be proficient in analysis of data that's generated from across the organization. So she or he will need to have a sound grounding in all aspects of business administration and management, not just HR. And she and he or he will also need to be inquisitive. If we put up the next slide, by inquisitive, I mean there is a need for the HR professional to work in close collaboration with other departments in order to gain an understanding of their processes and to specifically look at organizational design to determine if it facilitates the creation of value. As you may have realized from what I've said so far, unless you are looking specifically for someone to lead a project, for people with specific skills, or at succession planning, it is rare that you will look at the more human side of people relationship when planning the HR strategy. You're looking more at posts than you are at people. In strategic planning, people are seen as a resource and often an expensive one. However, we need to remember that it is the employee that will ultimately generate value. Having determined how we can link HR strategy to the value chain, that's what we've just been through, we now need to look at the internal environment and to the people who will deliver value to the customer. And this really starts by looking at organizational culture. Bring up the next slide. In fact, we have the next slide there. But if we can go back one, Jyoti. Lovely. Culture is one of the most elusive entities, and it can be hard to evaluate. It can shape attitudes and behaviors while setting an agenda for what should be encouraged, discouraged, accepted, or rejected. And it needs to be aligned to values, drivers, and needs. The culture needs to mirror the brand that the organization wishes to present to the external environment. A simple example of this can be seen by looking at the brand that has been established by the Apple Corporation. I think most of us use iPhones, and at how this is reflected of the culture that has been adopted in the company itself. The Apple brand is synonymous with innovative products such as the iPhone, so it's not surprising, therefore, to learn that the culture within the company is one whereby innovation is seen as a major factor. Their people are provided with the time, resources, support, and development that allows them to be both innovative and creative, and where failure is accepted, as long as the lessons can be learned from it. In the next slide, you'll see that I've said it should also be noted that most successful business, instead of managing conflict in order to generate innovation, nurture collaboration in order to create a learning environment. And I think that's extremely important. This is most certainly the case with Apple. However, this also requires outstanding leadership and management skills. Good leadership provides sustainability and supports the culture within the organization. I count myself as being extremely fortunate in that I worked for an organization that, as you progressed up the management ladder, provided junior, intermediate, interim, and advanced management and leadership training in order to prepare managers for their new roles. Now, that wasn't just general management. We actually had general management courses, but then certainly at the junior and the interim stage, the interim being middle management, then we also had what we called a trade management training course that we went on after we'd undertaken the general management training. And that taught us how to use that general management training in our own workplace. So you have people from the same department actually undertaking that particular course. If we go on to the next slide, yeah, I'm amazed at the number of organizations that promote people into management positions based on their technical skills alone. We see this a lot in the UK, where people are very good at their job, but then they get promoted, but they have no people management skills. So what we're saying here is that an organization really needs to provide training, mentoring, or coaching in the management of people. I recently read this quote from a person that is the head of HR in a UK organization, and it said, "We, meaning HR, should be leading the people element of business divisions." I think this is a dangerous misconception that could explain why we're seeing a decline in the standard of management and leadership within organizations. If we go on to the next slide, you'll see that I've said that HR does not manage people. It is the line management that leads and manages people on a day-to-day basis. It is the responsibility of the HR professional to facilitate and support the management of people across the management structure within the organization. By that I mean it is the responsibility of the HR department to ensure that business leaders and line managers are provided with the training, coaching, and mentoring that will ensure that successful management of people and reinforce the organization's culture at all levels. This can be included as part of succession planning or undertaken as part of the induction training or onboarding process. Whichever way it is undertaken, in my view, management training should be provided for the organization, by the organization, in order to ensure that managers are in a position to foster the organizational behavior required to support the cultural requirements of the workforce. And this should be reinforced by the provision of ongoing mentoring and coaching. By that I mean, if you're going to outsource your training, there's nothing wrong with that, but you have to make sure that the training that your people are receiving actually reflects the needs of the organization and not just a generic training course given by somebody to every organization. All organizations are different. If we go on to the next slide, it is the line management that should know their people and determine how best to engage them in a way that will support the value chain. And it is for the HR professional to ensure that the HR strategy and HR policies facilitate employee engagement, whilst providing the support to the management team that I've already mentioned. As you will be aware, there are a number of actions that can help to engage employees in adding value through their work. Some are quite obvious, such as pay and benefits, training, development, career management, recognition for the contribution they make in the workplace, trust in the leadership and management, and having supportive managers. Employee well-being is another one that's looked at these days very closely. Having sufficient resources to be able to undertake the tasks allocated to them, and of course this includes staffing levels. Clear and concise communication between management and employees, remembering that communication works both ways. Management also have to be prepared to listen to their people's concerns and suggestions. I've already mentioned the brand that Apple have built by providing a culture whereby people are encouraged to be innovative and to collaborate. But there are two other facets that can have an effect on engagement. The first is a belief in the quality of the product or service being provided by the employer, thereby engendering belief in the quality of the product or service and engendering pride in the work. I mean, who would not want to work for the likes of Ferrari with their iconic history in the production of sports cars? I started out in the motor industry, and we actually at Chrysler made Commer and Dodge lorries. I would have loved to have worked for Ferrari. You know, what a brand. But it does come back to that brand. And you don't have to be the likes of Ferrari or the likes of Apple to get your brand across. You just need to provide a good product. And for people that work for you to actually have belief in that product and belief in what they're doing. The second is strategy alignment. Whether the employees understand and buy into an organization's plans for the future. It is this second point on which I would like to concentrate for the next few minutes. People need to have an appreciation of how the organization has evolved, its history, how it has reached its present position, and of the direction that senior management envisaged that the organization will take in the future. They need to have an appreciation of the goals that have been set and of the benefits that will be derived through change. They also need to know how they will be expected to play their part in ensuring future success. And to do this, they need to understand the value chain, the interdepartmental interactions that support the value chain, and the importance and value of the work that they themselves will undertake. This is the link between employee engagement and the value chain itself. And yet, so very often, we see a failure in connecting these crucial elements together. One recent example where there was a disconnect between the employees and the value chain resulted in a significant loss of market share. I'll go into that in a little more detail because I noticed one of the questions sort of comes down to that. I did some work for an organization recently whereby there'd been quite a big turnover of staff in one department. There had also been quite a lot of work left in that department that was well overdue to be completed. But because the new team just saw that work as being an administrative task, they put it to one side and decided that they had better things, that there were other things they needed to crack on with. The problem with that was that those administrative tasks would have added value to the customer. And because it didn't add value, they lost quite a big chunk of their market share. And we're going now into hundreds of thousands of pounds. And that purely came down to the fact that the employees, the new employees that had come into that department, had no idea of the value chain, the interdepartmental interactions that supported the value chain, or the importance of that work that they had put to one side, and how that affected other departments and basically had an effect on the value out to the customer. And that's all it was. It was just a lack of knowledge of the value chain. And all that could have been sorted out purely by ensuring that they had good induction training, good onboarding, where they understood how the value chain worked. It was that simple. If we go on to the next slide, I've actually said that this could have been averted if they had understood the value chain and the interactions of other departments, and also of their own actions on the value chain itself. For the new employee, this information can and should be delivered as part of the induction training or onboarding. However, I'm seeing quite a considerable gulf between what I consider to be an excellent approach to onboarding and those organizations whose onboarding programs leave a great deal to be desired. In the example that I've just provided, the onboarding consisted of showing new employees the facilities and then to provide on-the-job training. There was no mention of the value chain. For existing employees, senior management should take the opportunity to brief their people after completion of the corporate planning process and provide an opportunity for people to ask questions in order to ensure clarity of vision by the employees. This may sound obvious, but experience has shown that poor two-way communication between senior management and their employees is one of the most prevalent failings in the business environment when it comes to both change management programs and in adding value to the end customer. And one thing I will say there is, again, in another organization that I was working with, they suggested that senior management might give this information in the form of a video. I would suggest you would be better off having a member of senior management there to actually explain it, so as people at least can ask questions. You know, if people have questions on their mind, it is a distraction from their work. So it's better if these questions are answered. To conclude this talk, the HR professional needs to be aware of the trends in the internal and external environments. That will lead to changes being made to corporate strategy and to link the HR strategy directly to each individual goal in the business plan. That's how we link the HR strategy into the value chain itself. Provided that the organization has mapped out the value chain and that organizational goals have been linked to the value chain, in other words, linked to the customer working back through the organization, then by linking HR strategy to individual goals, the HR strategy will be linked directly into the value chain itself. The future of digitization will provide the HR professional with a unique opportunity to be able to analyze data from across the organization. However, for the HR professional to be able to add value through the incorporation of a HR strategy focused on business outcomes and be proficient in the analysis of data that is generated from across the organization, she or he will need to have a sound grounding in all aspects of business administration and management. There is also a need for the HR professional to collaborate closely with other departments in order to gain an understanding of how interdepartmental interactions and the organizational culture supports the value chain. When looking at leadership and management, there is a need to ensure that people holding management positions are adept at leading and managing people. This is not always the case. Whilst corporate and HR strategy can be aligned to the value chain, it is the employees that will deliver value to the customer. It is therefore crucial that the employees understand the value chain, the interdepartmental interactions that support the value chain, and how they themselves add value, and that they are fully engaged in meeting the expectations of the customer. This can be done through clear and concise communication as part of succession and induction or onboarding processes, and through good leadership and management in meeting the expectations of both the customer and the employee. I do hope that from what I've said today, you will be able, if you take nothing else away, it's the fact that you need to connect HR strategy directly in against the goals on the business plan. And by doing so, then you're connecting the HR strategy itself to the value chain. But you also need to ensure that that the employees are also fully engaged in supporting that value chain. And that will really come down to HR to manage. I hope that you found this enjoyable and useful. Jyoti, are you still there? Jyoti, can you hear me?
Yes, George, are you able to hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, great. George, we are moving on to the question and answer round, and we have a lot of queries that have come up from the audience. So, the first question has come from Saurabh Sinha, who wants to know what can be the milestones to be set and matrices which should be used to measure effectiveness of value chain. So, he really wants to know the indicators to measure effectiveness of value chain.
Right, well, personally, I would use key point indicators for that. And those obviously have to be tied into each individual goal that the organization has put in place in the business plan. From an HR perspective, then you can use those key point indicators to evaluate where you are with the HR strategy that you have put in place against each of those individual goals. But I would be careful. Again, just from an organization that went into recently, they had a traffic light system for their key point indicators, which was all very good. It told you whether it was green, amber, or red, but there was no indication of why it might have been amber or red. There was nothing to say, well, we've come this far, but we now have a problem. so when the quarterly review was undertaken of the key point indicators, management really, or senior management, didn't really know what the problems were. So you need to ensure that you have a remarks column on whatever you're using for your key point indicators to show where you are with any particular goal.
Thank you, George. The next question is from Arpit Jain, who wants to know how to link HR strategy to the value chain of an organization.
Yeah, that really is by linking the HR strategy into all the individual goals in the business plan. It's really becoming a point now whereby HR has to be a lot more agile. And in doing so, you've got to be able to cope with change very, very quickly in a business environment. And by doing that, if you actually tie the HR strategy into the business plan itself against each individual goal, when you review those goals and change them, you will also be reviewing and changing the HR strategy as well. But that actually links the strategy directly into the value chain.
Great. Thanks, George. The next question is from Vikas Kumar, who wants to know the future of HR post digitalization. So that's one thing which you have also covered during the presentation. So if you could share more insights on that.
Yes, I can see that the future of HR is going to change. I mean, there's no two ways about that. And you will find a lot of articles that will talk about the future of HR. I've mentioned one by David Ulrich. Professor David Ulrich was the gentleman that actually came up with the idea of the HR business partner. And I believe even that is changing now because he's now on to version 2, which he's publicized just recently. With digitization, a lot of it is going to be down to being able to analyze all the information that is going to come HR's way. And there's going to be a lot of it. It's knowing what information you actually need and what information isn't really relevant to HR, but you're likely to receive a lot of data, some of which is relevant, some which is not. You have to be able to distinguish between the two and use that data to actually ensure that your HR strategy and your people engagement policy is working. Because as I've said, it's people that bring about change. It's people that add value, and you've got to ensure that they are engaged in what they are doing. If you look, a lot of the data that will come out from a more holistic IT setup, which I believe is what's going to happen, you'll be able to see data from right the way across from production, accounts, marketing, sales. You will see a lot of data coming through, and a lot of it is going to come down to data analysis and knowing what to do with the data that you're receiving. To do that, then you obviously need to have a wide understanding of business administration and management, because there's going to be a lot there that you're going to have to analyze that isn't going to look as though it's HR specific, but which could be affecting, or maybe the HR strategy is affecting problems further down the line. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. In fact, coming back to the question that was asked by Arpit Jain, and there are more queries from the audience wherein we would like to know what are the best ways, effective ways to link HR strategy to the value chain of the organization.
Well, that really is, as I've said, come down to ensuring that the HR professional is actually part of the planning team, and ensuring that if you do that, then the HR professional actually hears what the other heads of department are saying, you get an idea of the interactions between other heads of department and how they're putting together the business plan itself and how they're coming up with the goals that they feel need to be attained. By then linking the HR strategy directly into those goals in the business plan, you actually are linking HR strategy directly into the value chain itself. And the good thing about it is that it means that by having the HR professional in there and actually putting the HR strategy together at the same time as the goals are being highlighted by the other heads of department, the other heads of department also have an opportunity to have an input into the HR strategy and ensure that they are getting what they need to support what they need to do. That's how you get it into the value chain.
Great. Thanks, George. The next question has come up from Amit and Kedar Thakur, and there are a lot of us who have similar queries pertaining to the fact if HR would cease to exist in future, or if the HR skill would become redundant in future.
The answer to that is no, it will not cease to exist. It will, however, change quite dramatically, I believe, with digitization and with AI. As I've already said, there will be a lot of data that HR will need to analyze and will need to act on. You know, everybody sees the idea of digitization actually losing jobs, but in fact, when we look across a lot of the areas within business, it could actually create jobs just purely by the amount of data that is going to be produced. And as I've already said, it is people that actually provide the value within the value chain. You know, there is always going to be a requirement for HR to set the strategy and the policy for the management of people. That's not going to go away.
Great. Thanks, George. There's another related question from Rachna Gera, who wants to know how can we shape up and equip ourselves to get aligned with the future requisites of HR?
Well, the way you can do that is very much by being inquisitive. You need, as I've said, collaboration is a big thing in business. You know, if you look at the success of businesses, then the most successful businesses go down the line of collaboration. And it's a case of HR actually going and poking their nose in, if you like, into other departments to see how they work, what the problems are, how can they help to provide support to those departments, thereby supporting the value chain itself. So that really is the way forward. You've got to be inquisitive. You've got to have an understanding of the wider implications of business administration and management to do that. But it really is a case of not going in and being a nuisance to people, but certainly going in and saying, you know, what problems have you got in your department? You know, is there anything that, you know, we need to look at from an HR point of view to ensure that we're giving you the support that you require? And don't wait. I think what I'm saying is don't wait for departmental heads to come to you with problems. Go and look and see what's happening.
Absolutely. And the next question is from Mr. Vardarajan, who wants to know why is HR so insecure in trying to find their place in the value chain?
Oh, what a good question. Could be a number of reasons for that. I know there's a big push to get HR onto the C-suite, onto the top table. To do that, HR really needs, it comes back to, if you were asked a question about finance, could you answer it? Because there is bound to be a connection between finance and HR. If you were asked a question on productivity and, why there might be a shortfall in productivity in a given department, could you come up with some sort of reasoning for that? It's really knowing the business and knowing and having this wider understanding of business management. If we go back to how HR is actually formulated over the years, I mean, we started off back in the 1970s where HR really was an admin task. It was mostly down to payroll, contracts of employment, that sort of thing. We then moved on to the 1980s, late 80s, early 90s, where we moved into the HR business partner role, where HR business partners were supposed, and I say supposed to in inverted brackets because I don't think it always worked that well, but they were supposed to provide support to given areas within the organization. And as I say, that has changed because Professor Dave Ulrich has actually come out with a new version of the HR business partner. But it really comes down to the fact that I think HR has been very much blinkered, and I don't mean this a criticism of anybody, but I think over the years it's been very much blinkered as, purely looking after people. It hasn't really looked at the value chain and the value that it is required to provide. Excuse me. And I think what's happening now is the realization that HR needs to do more.
Absolutely. We as HR, we are working as strategic partners and involved in a lot of decision making. So,
Absolutely, and that's as it should be.
absolutely. Our next questions, and we have similar questions that have come up from Dinesh Kotial and Ankit, who want to know the best way to align objectives of an organization with HR strategies and policies, specifically in manufacturing units, and how to ensure improved productivity at shop floors.
Whoa, what a good question. Improved productivity, I'll deal with that one first. I mean, that really comes down to employee engagement and how you engage the employees into the value chain. That is probably the biggest problem, if you like, that organizations have had is this business of engagement. How do you engage your employees into ensuring that they know the value that they need to bring to the value chain? And do they understand the value chain? Do they understand the interdepartmental interactions that support the value chain and how their work will affect those interactions? And that's extremely important. I mean, we're no longer at the time whereby employees would just do something because they were told to do it by management. They now want to know why they're doing it. How does the system work? How are they providing value? So engagement is a big part of it, and development is a big part of engagement as well. And we often hear organizations saying, well, we don't want to spend money on people developing them because then we'll lose them. Well, you're going to lose them anyway if you don't develop them. The more development you can offer, the longer you will retain your employees. So that's the first thing. Productivity. Well, that really comes down to, um, first of all, the employee engagement itself and your policy on employee engagement, but also it comes down to management and leadership by the line management and how they, the culture within the working environment. And that really is an area that HR again needs to look at. It's not only organizational design, but it comes down to also organizational development, and it's all part of an HR process.
Absolutely. So obviously, whether in a manufacturing unit or other units, the HR strategies should be and policies should be aimed towards employee development, and in turn, that will result in organization development.
Absolutely.
The next question has come up from Veer, who wants to know the if value chain is a part of culture building of an organization. So, are they interlinked with each other?
Oh, absolutely. The culture and the value chain are definitely interlinked. It's all right having a value chain and having your strategies set out to support that value chain. But the culture within the organization will determine whether or not the employees themselves actually provide that value. And we've got to realize it is employees that actually add value. So the culture that's set down for things like personal development, well-being, and all these good things, they are really important when it comes down to productivity, the value chain, and what the customer gains at the end of all this.
Great. Thanks, George. The next question is from Hridyanand Hirdaya, who wants to know how to create a robust HR value chain and what are the measures to have a frequent reviewing mechanism.
I didn't catch the last part of that.
Sure, I'll repeat the question again. First is how to create a robust HR value chain. And secondly, how should we have, what are the measures to have it reviewed frequently?
Right. I'll deal with the first one first. I think probably if you, in fact, I don't think probably, I know, if you watch the the video that I talked about that David Ulrich has brought out, it's about 5 minutes long, on the future of HR. He actually maps out how HR and the value chain within HR itself works back from the customer or works back from the from outside of the organization back through the organization, but from an HR perspective. And I think people really need to look at that video to understand it. And the good thing about it is that it's not just him talking. He actually provides diagrams whilst he's talking to show you where all this fits in. And that really is something that I think you would be better looking at his work than just listening to me spout about it, if you like. As far as measuring HR's input to the value chain, obviously HR strategy, you can use KPIs, as I've already said, key indicators. But again, it comes down to actually going and looking and seeing whether or not HR strategy and the HR policies that support it are actually working in the various departments. It's being inquisitive, going and looking, being proactive. And I think that's where HR has tended to fail in the past. In as much as it hasn't been proactive, it's been waiting for people to bring their problems to HR and not going and looking to see where the problems actually exist. because more often than not, if you have to change something in one department, it could have a knock-on effect in another. So you're better off going and looking and seeing what the problems are and how far those problems can expand themselves across the organization. How much change do you need to make? Is it just in one department, or is it across the whole organization, or is it in one or two departments? But you need to be proactive. And if you're proactive and you go and look at these things, then you will be able to see for yourself exactly where the problems are and what the problems are.
Absolutely. A very valid point, George. It's extremely critical to know the root cause and problem areas first. Moving
It
on
is.
to Yeah, absolutely. Moving on to the next question from Kiran Bibi, who wants to know how do we continue to make HR roles more competent using artificial intelligence by removing the routine works that we do?
Um, yeah, this is a problem that we have, in as much as if you go into an organization, each organization is unique, and really it's the uniqueness of the organization that will determine how best you can use IT systems. And there are a number of IT systems that are on the market to assist in doing away with a lot of the um, day-to-day administrative tasks of HR. But you have to pick the right system for you. And it may well be that when it actually comes down to digitization itself, and when we go through what people are calling the fourth industrial revolution, then you might be better off with a bespoke HR system rather than one that you've just pulled off the shelf that isn't going to provide you with everything you need. So it's a very difficult question to answer, and it's one really that you need to look across your organization, look at HR, look at the tasks that you feel could be digitized, and take it from there. I can't suggest any one system for any one organization because organizations are just so different.
Great. Thanks, George. Yes, we don't have any more queries at the moment. So, yes, definitely. With this, we come to an end of this session. So, we've answered almost all the queries that have come up from the audience. So,
If anybody does have any questions, um, I'm happy for them to link to me on LinkedIn and put the question directly to me in a message. Or if they don't want to do that, I'm happy. You and I are linked on LinkedIn. If they're happy to send the question to you, I'm happy for you to send it on and relay it to me. And I'll come back to you with the answer so as you can go back to the person that's asked the question. More than happy for that.
great. Thank you so much, George. And yes, I would request audience to kindly connect with us or kindly connect with Mr. George in case you have any queries. He's always been extremely supportive, and he definitely believes in learning through one and all. So, and he believes in continuous learning, and he feels there's no age and there's no time to learn new things. So,
Oh no, I'm 65 years of age and I'm still learning. I
great.
think we all learn from each other.
Absolutely, we do. So, this is all for the day. Thank you so much, George, for your time. It's definitely been an honor and a pleasure having you with us today. So, it's a golden
Well, thank,
opportunity for all of us to learn.
thank you very much for asking me because I feel it's a real privilege to be able to talk to you and to your members. And as I say, I'm more than happy for them to come at me with questions if they wish on LinkedIn, and I will provide them with the answers.
Great. Thank you. And also, a big thanks to all the audience, participants who've joined us, especially after Diwali and on a Saturday evening. So we would also be sharing the links for feedback. Would request you to kindly share your feedback, your views, so that definitely helps us in scheduling our sessions in a better manner. Last but not the least, a big thanks to Veer, Bhanu, Kirti, Kashish, and Anu, and many more behind the scene for their never-ending support and who have helped us have our learnings and knowledge sharing continued and our efforts being put on in the right direction. So thank you, everyone, and thank you so much, George, once again. Have a
Oh,
great weekend.
I was just about to say thank you, and can I just wish everybody a happy Denali?
Absolutely. Great. Thank you so much, George.
Thank you.